Rigging in Seneferu procedural pipeline. I will not talk, of course, about the rigging itself, but I'm going to talk about the considerations or the features or the advantage that Seneferu is going to give you during the rigging process. First of all, when you do, let's take an example first. Let's go for this guy here, and we have some assets that is ready here. So let's say that I'm going to work on, let's work on this lady here. Let's say that I'm going to work on this rig. First thing you will do is that you will load dependencies. As usual, this will load for you all the dependencies needed to do your task. And notice one very important thing here, that is by default, Seneferu is configured to load the models for the rig as using the method reference NR Alembic. NR Alembic is actually a custom version of Alembic that we developed to make the object gets referenced in Maya as if it is imported, but it will always have input connections or construction history to the objects with the NR Alembic node. This way, your asset will get updated automatically when a new version of the garment or the model have been updated. So this will fix your rig automatically in a lot of cases if the new model updates are not major updates that corrupting the asset. If there are major updates in the models has been happened in any new version that is published for any of the dependencies, your rig will be broken. Then you will need to reload the dependencies again and use the replace button to replace the base version with to replace the new updated version with the base version. There is a video tutorial that will show you how to fix the rig or any other processes in situations similar to this when the asset gets corrupted. So now let's do our rig. I will actually load the rig and I will come back again. So after you make the rig, you will be having something like this. I quickly made a human IK rig for this character. So let's select all the object and create asset locator. There is something very important here when you are creating the asset locator and when you are publishing things that require cache tags, like the case when publishing the rig. The cache tags actually are the objects that you have to tag for Seneferu, so he understands what are the renderable objects and what are not renderable objects in your asset. So the renderable, you have a lot of controls and a lot of things that you don't need to cache to Alembic or Pixar USD when the animation is cached. So you need to tell Seneferu what exactly has to be cached to Alembic or Pixar USD when you publish the rig, and accordingly, when you publish animation, these same objects are going to be cached. In our case, we want to cache all the renderable objects, like these objects, everything actually under the model except the hair guide, because we are going to have because we are going to have here set up for that, so this is only for viewing purpose and we will not cache it out. And we also are not going to cache the garment. It's just for viewing purpose during the animation and play blast, but when we cache the animation, we don't want the clothes to be in the generated cache. We don't want the garment to be at the hair reference to be in the cache. We don't want the control to be in the cache, any of the controls to be in the cache, so on. So I will only cache tag the objects that we want. If you are actually want to have the garment as a correction objects for the clothes simulation, then you can tag it. But if you are not going to follow this technique, then you don't need to tag the cloth for caching, because there will be cloth setup that will be responsible for generating cached cloth model or simulated cloth model according to the character animation. So the cloth is of course not going to be published out of the rig process. So we will not cache anything about the cloth here, except if you want this to be as driver for the simulation later, as I just mentioned. So you will select all the objects that needs cache tag, and you will click on the cache tag button. This, for your information, will create this attribute here, which will tag these objects as to be cached out of the rig. Seneferu is dealing with this information during the publish and during a lot of other processes that is beyond the scope of our session here. So once you did that, you will now be ready to publish. Okay, I got an error here because there is something I forgot to do. The system is telling you that to publish this character, you will have to have a set called Pauline, which is the name of the character. And this set should have all the rig controls that actually, why do I have this object here? I don't need this one. Then I will have to create a set of all the objects or all the controls. And this set should be named the same as the character. The reason why we want this is that Seneferu is configured to also utilize the studio library if you are aware of it. So we need this set because the system needs to know what are the controls that will be used during the exporting of animation clips in the animation phases. So this is needed to be there with the rig, because when you apply any animation clip to this character, the controls here will be needed. So now I think we are fine to publish the rig. As you notice, the system during the publish have selected the objects that we have tagged, and then these objects will be exported to Alembic Cache or Pixar USD depending on your configuration. So if you checked out the objects that have been exported, you will notice that only the tagged object has been exported. And by the way, there are some other considerations you may think about when you are doing this. I will check out one of the character rigs I have here. I want to show you something. Notice that I have a visibility control here that turns on and off the visibility of the non-renderable objects that is tagged for caching. We want to cache these garment objects whenever the cloth TD wants them to be cached as guide for the simulation later, in case they want to use it in the cloth setups. But we don't want these objects to be visible when the animation cache is loaded in lighting or in any other process. So what we want to achieve is that we want the rig to be having them visible, and the written out Alembic or Pixar USD cache, we want these objects to be cached as invisible objects. To achieve this, the cache exporter here, or the caches being generated during the publish, is going to look for a control called visibility and an attribute called show non-renderable objects. And the publisher will turn the visibility off during the cache export and will restore the original state back again before publishing the Maya scene of the rig itself. So when the Maya scene of the rig is loaded for animation, for example, the objects will be visible, and when the cache is loaded for lighting, the objects will be invisible, so the lighting artists will not need to go through all the assets and show and hide objects, which could be a lot of hassles and could make a lot of issues and mistakes and double objects and things like that. So it's recommended you have to have such control. If you don't have, or you are not willing to do something like this, then you have to write a pre-publish script where you can, for example, is that you go to the application config and you can edit the pre-published script found here, and you can add an additional Python script, Maya Python script in this case, because we are configuring the pre-published script of Maya. Then you can here check how we created this thing. You can tell if the process equals rig, then do whatever. So you can this way do any additional works that needs to be done before the publish to occur. So in that case, it will be just hiding the non-renderable objects. But of course, it's recommended that you just simply use the predefined object for the visibility to turn off these objects during the caching and the publishing. But of course, if these objects are not having a cache tag, then it's not going to be written to a cache. So in that case, you don't need the control because the objects are not in the cache in all cases. It's also a good idea that you select all the rig controls and you can set a keyframe at frame 900 with a flat tangent. This helps the animator later, because the animator will have to start the animation at the pine pose at frame 900. So in this case, it's recommended that you have this in the rig already, because the animation of any shot will always have to have these 100 frames for clothes and hair simulation relaxing before the animation starts at 1001. The frame numbers, of course, will differ depending on how you configure your pipeline, but if you are using the defaults that Seneferu ships with, then the first frame is 1001, and there are 100 frames for relaxing the clothes and hair for anything that requires simulation, not only the hair and clothes actually, but anything that requires simulation. You can increase the number of the relaxing frames, or you can keep it 100 as it is. But in such case, it's recommended that you have a flat tangent key at frame 900. In that case, the animator doesn't have to go to frame 900 for every character to set the key at the bind pose. And the reason why we want the keyframe to be flat tangent is that this is important for any physical simulation later, like clothes and hair. It's recommended that the animation doesn't start in linear, or in other words, it's recommended that the animation starts smooth. You might be thinking to yourself now that the rig looks ugly, and when it goes to animation, everything will be gray like this, then this will not be something good. So what I'm going to explain next in a later video is how to publish the Animtex, which is the task Animtex, which is the animation texture, is going to have a look file that you will publish, a character look file for each character. Then the animator can use the shader resolve button to resolve the anim look. When he resolves the anim look, this will have proper viewport shaders and textures for the eyes and a lot of things that will be assigned to the object to make it look fine during the animation. So we are not going to do this in the rigging process, because we don't want to republish the rig every time we want to update the shaders assigned to the character. Instead, we keep the character look file in a separate process, independent to the rig, and whenever the look needs to be applied, can be applied using the shader resolve rather than loading the rig itself, because sometimes we might need to apply this look on the cached objects from Alembic or Pixar USD rather than having them from the Maya scene of the rig itself. Of course, we are not having this published yet, and I will show it in a later video on how to publish the anim texture of the character. Now let's approve this task, and let's proceed with discussing something more complex. Let's assume that we have a compound rig, or we have an assembled character rig, like for example a horse and a horseman, where you need both of them to be independent to the other, but in the meanwhile sometimes you want to use them together, and you want to have additional control that connects them together, that makes the animation process easy. Let's configure something like this first in our asset management system. The way how you can do this is that, let's say that, for example, we want to create a horseman character, and in this case I will say that it is assembled character. And we can have any character and horse character and assemble them in the assets assembler. Here is our horseman that we just created, and let's take this asset here, which is a man, and let's get a horse. This is a horse character. Now this horseman becomes an assembled asset of both this character and the horse character, where each one of these two is having rig, and also the new one that we created, which is the horseman, is also having a rig. Let's assign it to myself. And we don't need the design task for it. Let's delete it. And let's see now how this will look like. Sorry, the horseman. As you can see here now that the two dependencies or the two asset rigs are coming as dependencies to the horseman, because we said that this is an assembled character from these two. So now when I load dependencies, the production manager will load all the dependencies needed to do your task, and will make your scene ready to start. So the reason why we want something like this is that we want to have each character functioning properly as independent to the other. In the meanwhile, we want this third compound asset or assembled character to be used in some situations when we want the two together. In this case, we will be able to have additional controls that constrain the two together and makes the animation process later easier for the animators. And you want to do this only once to not repeat it again and again by the animator during the animation of the two characters together. So now we can add some more controls, or maybe place the character on top of the horse and make some constraints, and publish this as a third character rig. In that case, when we go for shots, we can, for example, if we are planning the assets for shots, we can plan the horseman to a scene when we want, to a shot when we want the two together in the shot, or if we don't need them, then for the rest of the shots maybe we can have only the character if he's not having or if he's not riding the horse at this time. But the most important thing that you have to know is that you have to remember that the characters should start at the bind pose, because this is the pose where the clothes setups and hair setups are going to be. So make sure that at frame 900 both the two characters have to be at the bind pose. In addition to that, you need to if you are going to move this character and place it on top of the horse and make the constraint, you have to provide the controls that disables all of this during the transition between the bind pose to the final pose where the character will be on top of the horse. So this is very important, and to make sure that you are not moving the character through the horse during this transition, also to avoid any problems later during the hair and clothes simulation. I will not do this now, but that's what you have to consider during this process. At the end, all what you will have to do after creating the additional rig controls is to select everything and to create asset locator and publish. And don't worry about the cache tags this time, because each one of these two rigs is coming with the cache tags that you have created before, so you don't need to tag any objects again. So the advantage of having this type of assembled characters, that you can use each one of the characters independent to the other in the different shots, while in the same time you can have an assembled rig where you have an additional controls that ties these characters together, that you can load it when the parent assembled character rig is requested for the shot. In that case, it will come to the animator as dependency here. So if this is an animation task of the horseman, then the horseman rig will be here, which will be loaded as dependency to the animator. In that case, it will be the horseman rig. If only the horse or only the character is in the shot, then this rig will not be needed. Accordingly, you can have several horsemen with different riders, but the same horse, and so on. Let's look at a similar example where I have here a train. Then let's say that I will set this train also to be an assembled character. In that case, it will appear here. Then I want the train books to be member in the train. Notice that in this case, I'm not having 3 assets as a parent and 2 children or several children, doesn't matter, but I only have the main rig and a child. So in this case, let's see what is going to happen. If you load that, then when I load dependencies, the 2 rigs will be loaded. Actually, not the 2 rigs. In that case, it will be the model and the rig of this, which will have the model. But of course, I don't have a rig for that. Let's make an initial rig first. We loaded dependencies of this. Let's delete this for now. I will just create one joint. Where is the rigging? And I will create just one joint here. And I will do just a quick constraint. Okay, and I will publish this as rig. Let's also cache tag, don't forget that. This shouldn't be inside the group, and I will create asset locator for the rig. And this will also require control set called train box, which is the name of the character, as I mentioned before. Then let's publish this just initial rig to continue the example. Okay, so now when I have this, if we go back again to the train rig, then when I load dependencies for this train rig, now you will notice that we will get the model of the of this train, because it's the dependency of the rig, and because this is an assembled rig, we will also have the rig of the train, of the train box. In that case, maybe I will use the rig control to move this here, and you can have the start doing this rig, and you can connect the two rigs together. In that case, whenever this rig is needed as standalone rig, you can have it, and whenever this is needed with the rest of the dependencies, you have it, and so on. So that is the concept of having hierarchical rigs. And of course, the reason why I came here is actually I wanted to tell that you can load this several times Of course, I should be having proper controls, but just for this demo, okay, so now let's say that, let's make them look better. It's this one and this one. This. And this. Still one more. Okay, so now this is the model task of the train, and these are multiple instances of the post train box. Then you can connect all these rigs together and build the rig of this character. Then you can tell that all these things are one rig. And of course, you will have to cache tag all the object that has to be cached. And you will have to create the rig control, but of course, because I don't yet have the rig done, then I will not create the rig control, but what you are going to do is to publish this. Let's actually create a control. So after the rig is done, then it's just a simple rig where this spline is controlling the everything. And yeah, so okay, then we can now cache tag the objects. Although the objects are already tagged, because these are all coming from rig, which means that the objects are already cached tagged, so only the model needs to be needs to have cache tags. So let's tag it and select everything and create asset locator. And remember that we have to have the controls in one set. This will be train. Then we can publish this rig. Now, as you see, all the objects that were having a cache tag are selected and will be exported to one static Alembic file or USD file if you are if your pipeline is configured to prefer the USD over the Alembic. We can check the exported. Yeah, so this is what was exported as static Alembic file. Then this is our whole rig. Then according to that, whenever we update this rig or we want to update, maybe we may want to have different types of post wagons. Maybe we need to change these things. Then the rig will be standalone, and these can be just constrained inside a containing rig or assembled rig, as how we just did in this asset or the Horseman asset.